to Cancer Smiles and Sarcasm. Today, we have your host, me, Tammy Tallant, and I'm here to talk about estate planning. Once you get that news of cancer, man, you're walking through everything. You got to go through treatment. You got to go through all these options medically, and you have to think about your dreams. But what happens when we pass? What happens with all of our assets? What are we leaving our loved ones with to deal with? Those are the answers we need to have, especially when we're looking at cancer in the face. What are we going to do when it happens, right? What are we going to do if we become incapacitated? Let's listen to today's episode and find out how we can plan for that. So, first of all, I want to start with I am a lawyer in Colorado. And this is not intended to be legal advice, right? Every state has different laws when it comes down to probate and estate plan. I'm not here to offer you legal advice. You need to consult with an attorney to find out the specifics about your state and what your state requires. You might want to go online and fill out all the forms online. That's fine. But I recommend that you consult with an attorney to find out that those forms actually comply with your state's laws. I particularly know Colorado laws. I do not know other states' laws. I am not licensed to practice in other states. But again, this is not legal advice. This is just general guidance based on general probate knowledge, general estate planning knowledge, which seems to go across the board throughout the states. So let's get started. A good estate plan is going to include your last will and testament. That is, what do you want to happen with your assets when you die? Who is going to manage your estate when you die? So that is called a personal representative or an executor. Who is going to manage your estate? You're going to appoint that in your last will and testament. A lot of people like to think of living wills. I'm going to talk about living wills in a second, but just because you're living and you're writing a will, that does not make it a living will. At least in Colorado, it's a last will and testament. And in our state, a living will is something completely different. So what you want is a last will and testament. That's going to say, hey, I want my Harley Davidson to go to this person. I want my Picasso painting to go to this person. I want my personal belongings to be donated to this charity, et cetera, right? And if that person is not living when I die, then as a backup, I want it to go to this person. So this is what happens once you pass, okay? After you pass, this is how somebody is going to deal with all of the assets that you have. If not, your assets are going to go into probate. And we hear a lot about this. In some states, you might need a trust. In some circumstances, you might need a trust. Okay? A trust is in addition to your last will and testament. A trust might be for somebody with significant disabilities. A trust might be for somebody certain public benefits, such as Medicaid or Medicare. A trust is meant to deal with taxes during your life, right? So you can have a living trust and you can have a trust that only exist once you pass. A trust might also be for a person who's faced with the unfortunate circumstances of having a lot of assets, a lot of money, but for example, they might have a child who is a drug addict and going to misspend all of their assets. So once that parent dies, then if the child were to inherit all of that money, then they might go out and spend all of that money on drugs, and it might not be good for their life. It also might be perfect for somebody who has a disabled child. And once the person dies, then it needs to go into a special trust so that that child is not disqualified from receiving those public benefits, right? So those are some of the reasons why we have a trust. Again, you want to talk to an attorney. Also, if you are in a situation where you just simply want to control what happens after you pass. For example, if you have a spouse who hasn't contributed, or you have tons of money, you have a prenuptial agreement perhaps, and you want that spouse to just get a certain amount of money. And then if they remarry, then they don't get any of your assets, right? And then your assets then go to somebody else or a charitable cause. Okay, those are the reasons you would have a trust. Without a will or without a trust, it just might be that your estate has to go into probate. And what probate is, basically, in a nutshell, is that the court is involved. right? So somebody has to file with the court, say, hey, you've passed away, and now I need to distribute. Now, let's say your son needs to now distribute your estate, but you didn't have a will, or you didn't have a trust, or you left something out. And so now they need the court's permission to do that. Before any banks will talk to them, before the mortgage company will talk to them, before they can sell your house, they need to go through the probate process. And the probate process could cost thousands of dollars, right? And that money is going to come from your estate. So you're depleting your estate without the will or without the trust. So this is some of the reasons for having a will or a trust. The other parts of a good estate plan include powers of attorney. Powers of attorney are good for your life, during your life, while you're still alive. So we have medical powers of attorney and we have financial powers of attorney. Who's going to make medical decisions should you become incapacitated? Should you not be able to voice what you want to happen when you're incapacitated? That is the point of a power of attorney for medical purposes. For financial purposes, you might have a spouse, right? And in your state, it might be, such as Colorado, that if you have a separate bank account, that spouse just can't go in and start operating your bank, right? If you have a business, that person can't go in and just start operating your business. They need the court's permission without a power of attorney. So once you have the power of attorney, then your spouse can then go and start operating your bank account or start paying your business rent or start doing whatever financial obligations you have that your spouse might not be a joint owner on or a joint partner with. And so that power of attorney is just something simple. Once it's signed, once you're incapacitated, it then kicks in and allows somebody to start managing your financial affairs. So nothing happens while you're incapacitated. Once you become unincapacitated, then you could start managing those financial affairs again. But this is important because alternatively, without powers of attorney, whomever it is that loves you and is looking after you is going to go and have to apply for guardianship or conservatorship. Guardianship is basically like assuming the role of a parent, right? They get to make medical decisions for you. They get to help decide where you're going to live. They get to decide if you're subject to a contract or any other legal obligations. They get to fulfill lawsuits on your behalf, et cetera, et cetera. But somebody would need that if you become incapacitated and are unable to make decisions on your own and you did not have a power of attorney. Conservatorship is pretty much the same thing, except for it's financial. So who's going to manage your financial affairs? If you don't have a financial power of attorney, that person then has to go to the court and apply to be a conservator to start managing your financial affairs. Yeah, I can tell you in Colorado that those events cost thousands and thousands of dollars, all that comes from your estate or somebody else's pocket. And so you want to be ahead of that by executing a power of attorney now. Most hospitals, before you go through an event, some sort of surgery, they are going to have sometimes 5 wishes, or they're going to have you sign a power of attorney. They're going to have you sign a DNR. Things like that. Do not resuscitate as a DNR. So those are things that sometimes you can just fill in. They're not going to have you fill in a financial power of attorney. They're going to have you fill in something quick and easy. Who's going to make your medical decisions for you? You want to make sure that that's in order. That's in part of your medical file. Okay? Once those are on your medical file, then anyone who's able to look at your medical file can then look at that. All of these things are revocable, modifiable, nothing set in stone. And some of them, should you become subject to a divorce, if your spouse is your agent under a power of attorney, at least in Colorado, then once the divorce starts, then your spouse is no longer able to be your agent. It would kick into the next successor agent. The next thing is a living will. At least that's what it's called here in Colorado. A living will is essentially a DNR. So what's going to happen to you while you're alive as it relates to feeding tubes, pain pills? Do you want to be resuscitated? If not, you're going to put that in the living will. Do you want to be on feeding tubes and artificial hydration? Do you want pain pills? Do you want that for a certain amount of time, 48 hours, so your loved ones can come and see you because they live in different states? 72 hours. Maybe a week if somebody's out of the country and it's really important to you. So those are things that you want to think about, and that would be declared in the living will. We also have DNRs, which are do not resuscitate. Again, those become part of your medical file. That is a good estate plan in a nutshell. So you're going to have your will, for sure, your powers of attorney, 2 of them, and a living will. Those are the basics. That's a good starting point. Then you might need deeds, right? So what's going to happen to your real property, which is real estate, once you pass away? There are certain deeds that would pass, such as that would like operate as a pay on debt. So what's going to happen with your property once you die? It's recorded in the public records. Those deeds are definitely called something different in different states. I know that to be a fact. And then you might also use a deed to transfer your assets into joint ownership with somebody at this time. Just because you're married, it doesn't mean legally that when you die that your spouse gets that property. Again, they would have to go through the probate process. So a deed is another part of a good estate plan, if necessary. Business documents. Are you operating a business? What happens to that business when you become incapacitated? And what happens to that business when you pass? Where do those assets go? So you might need articles of incorporation, you might need your bylaws or operating agreements or whatever it might be called to address all of that stuff that's declared through a business document. All right, so that's the basics for a good estate plan. It's important that you do this now. As somebody with cancer, I can tell you that when you start doing it when you have cancer, God, it's the last thing you want to do. And it's sad. But if you do it before you have cancer or in the beginning when you're not really looking death in its face, I guess, it's easier to do it, okay? It's a little less emotional. Get your estate plan in order. And really, a good estate plan is to protect your assets. If you only have $10,000 in the bank, would you like that $10,000 to go to a lawyer, to go to the court? Or would you like that $10,000 to go to your child, to your grandchild, to pay for your funeral expenses? I mean, a good cremation or funeral costs, I mean, those you're looking at like $1,300 just to cremate you, $8,000 for a full burial. And that's just the basics. That's the minimum. Those are the minimum averages for a lot of states. So who's going to pay for that? You want to have the money in your estate. You want to preserve as much as you can for your loved ones and make sure that when you pass, that your loved ones aren't wandering around needing to have a GoFundMe account or whatever it is, start selling all of your stuff against the probate court and start selling all of your stuff to try and pay for your burial. They can't put you on ice, right? You're going to be sitting in the morgue, and who's going to be paying for that? You don't want your child to have to come out of pocket, especially if your child's only working at the grocery store, right? How are they going to get that money? Then you might need life insurance, investments, and all of these things, okay? And once you pass, like let's say life insurance, for example, once you pass, life insurance usually pays within 48 hours. So then your loved ones automatically have the money. It seems like a bad investment now, but I can tell you right now, as somebody who has stage 4 cancer, the best way that we could spend, my husband and I could spend $200 is to put that in a life insurance policy, right? Because we know that I'm going to die and it might be within a few years. Within a few years, we might only pay a couple $1,000s into that life insurance policy, but that life insurance policy is going to pay my husband $25,000 when I pass. Shit, that is a great investment. It is much better than putting $200 in the bank. Alternatively, you can be like me, except for that stupid life insurance policy we have. I just go fucking spend it, right? I am dying, right? So I'm spending every fucking dollar that I have to go and live life, right? To go to Aspen, to go to the bar and shit away my money to have a beer and go to Mexico, whatever I want to do with it, right? I'm spending it. I don't care. But a good, wise person who's somebody, especially who has beneficiaries, right? Beneficiaries is somebody who's going to benefit from your estate, right? Who's going to take your money, who's going to take your assets when you die. I personally don't have that. I don't have children. So I'm going to go out and spend my money. I have no one really to give it to except for my dear friends, but they have their own shit, right? They don't need my shit. So when I die, somebody's going to get a life insurance policy. Hopefully it's my husband, and he's going to be able to pay for my cremation. And then he's going to have a nice little pocket of money for himself to go out and celebrate. I hope he throws me a decent funeral, something with some music, something good. but then maybe he'll have some left over and it's not going to be such a burden on him when I pass. Okay. And I said I was going to be done, but wait, I just thought of one more thing. Some states will accept medical directives, some agencies. So, should you be put into a nursing home, what happens to you then? And you can put this in your medical power of attorney. You can also write it in your living will, but medical power of attorney is better. So, is there a certain nursing home or hospice care that you would prefer? Write that all down. Your spouse or your loved ones, they might have heard you talk about this, but it's not going to be at the forefront of their mind when they're worried about you, when they're trying to take care of you, right? So write this stuff down. And then medical directives would say things such as, I want to be offered food all the time, even if I can't talk, or I don't want to be offered food. Some people work in nursing homes and they know what this looks like. Again, it's a total personal preference, but you want to maybe even talk to somebody now about what that looks like, research what that looks like, and what do you want to happen when you're incapacitated and you can't speak for yourself, besides the basics, the artificial nutrition and the feeding tubes and the pain pills. What do you want as far as your care? Do you have certain religious preferences? Do you want a priest to come in? Do you want somebody else to come in and give you your last rites or whatever it might be? What do you want that to look like? Those are important instructions to write out. All right. This was not that fun of an episode, like no laughter, nothing like that. But hey, this is important stuff. And so as you go through your cancer journey, and hopefully before you go through your cancer journey, you establish a good estate plan. And if you need an attorney in Colorado, I am here for you. Visit resolutionlaw.org. I'm a virtual law firm, so you can set up an appointment with me virtually. We can do everything virtually. You can have the documents notarized virtually. I serve all of Colorado in that way. So it's www.resolutionlaw.org. If you like this, please leave a comment. If you have any other questions or want me to have any other episodes like this, I'm definitely going to do a right to die one and talk about that for the right to die that exists in some states, very minimal states. But if you have any other issues or any other topics you want me to go through, please, I've been doing probate law for 10 years. I write estate plans. I've been doing that for 10 years. And so I really enjoy talking about this. Please just leave that in the comments. Let me know what you think about this and certainly follow me. Have a great day, y'all.